had me at Cello, Cello. You had me at Cello. You had me at Cello. Oh, you had me at Cello. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Cello Chat, and let's get right to it. I'm excited to have with me today Paul Christopher. Paul, I've got a number of questions I'm really anxious to ask you, but first things first, how are you doing?
Fine, thank you. And I very much appreciate you inviting me to participate in this chat today, my friend.
All right, it's going to be my pleasure, I know. All right, so I always like to start with just your background. Everybody has a different story as to, how you first got started on the cello and then how your education and your journey took you to where you are.
Mhm. Well, okay, I'll try to be brief about this. I'm originally from upstate New York, Syracuse, New York, and I'm a product of the public school system there. I'm also a product of a single parent household. Nobody in my family on my mother or father's side had anything to do with classical music. I'm the only person that ever got involved in that. And after public school in Syracuse, I went to the New England Conservatory and I received my education degree. And then I taught public school, mainly middle school, but I also drove around and taught high school and elementary school in Greenville, South Carolina. This was back in the early 80s, which is where I met my wife. She was also a string teacher. After I taught for several years, I decided I wanted to go back to school and see if I could make a living performing. So I sort of bumped around, worked on my master's degree in fits and starts. I went to Tennessee, Memphis. I lived in Indiana for a while, played in the Charlotte Symphony, went back to Memphis. So it took me like 4 or 5 years to get my master's degree. After I got my master's degree, and then I had to decide if what I wanted to do next. And I was thinking of working on a doctorate or trying to get some work. I got a position in the New Orleans Symphony. New Orleans Symphony had money problems, so before I even went there, I got offered a string quartet job and a principal job in Shreveport, Louisiana, of all places. I moved there, played in string quartet with the orchestra, taught at Stephen F. Austin as an adjunct professor in Texas. Then there were some problems with the symphony. I ended up moving back to Tennessee, played in the Nashville String Machine for a while, did nothing but studio work. Then I left Nashville, came back to Louisiana, was hired as a professor at Northwestern State University in Natchitoches, which is where I am now. So once again, I'm sorry that was sort of long, but I sort of took a circuitous route and did a number of different things in my career, um, to make a living. So yeah, it's long.
Oh, no, that's great. And I'm trying to think in terms of order of questions.
Mhm.
The first one that comes to mind, I know a lot of the people who watch these, for example, either do take orchestral auditions or are considering it.
Mhm.
You just even touched on, I mean, there's a lot of orchestral auditions that you've taken, and different orchestras sometimes are looking for different things, you know. Do you have some general words of advice that worked well for you in preparing for orchestral auditions?
Oh, good. That's a good question. I mean, I'm an older guy, and the whole orchestra scene has changed since I first began auditioning. Um, that's a toughie. I would say, look, in general, I like playing an orchestra. I don't know if you want, look, for young players that want to do that for a full-time career, that's not, I don't mean to be, I don't mean to rain on anyone's parade. That's very tough. Okay. And if you're going to do orchestra playing, that's something that you really need to focus on from a very early age, developing the repertoire, really focusing on that. My only words of advice for that would be if you're when you're taking audition, that it's a long-term process. You need to know the repertoire intimately, not just the solo, the individual part, but you need to know how it fits in. I'm sure you would agree with that. It needs to be as technically perfect and tonally perfect as possible. I think the argument that orchestras are looking for individuality, I tend to not totally agree with that. I think if you're a principal cellist, yes. I think when you're playing solo William Tell or the Brahms Second Piano Concerto, yeah, there's going to be some individuality there. But I think for a very big orchestra, the what they're looking for is someone that can fit in as quickly as possible. And because there's not a lot of rehearsal time in a major orchestra, there's not time to really train people in the repertoire. You need to fit in as quickly as possible. And so I would suggest that if you want to audition for an orchestra, to listen to these orchestras to see if you can work with people that have had experience playing in orchestras to get an idea what they're looking for, principal players, people that are on audition committees. Once, if you're lucky enough to get a job, and I think you would agree with this, Benjamin, when you get there, you need to make sure you're an uber professional. You're not going to get involved in politics. You're not going to be talking about people behind their back. You're just going to be a quiet, very serious professional so that you make sure you can survive the tenure period, which is often which has often killed many a career. So I know that's not really great advice, but that's just the general, just being prepared, being a professional, working with people that are versed in the audition experience, and then just keep your nose to the grindstone. It's very, very difficult and very demanding.
Yeah, I think that's very good advice. All right, so I've got to ask, the Nashville String Machine. Can you tell like a little bit about what that was and who all you got to play with along these lines? And part of why I'm asking is, again, I know like my own students, some of the other people watching think, wow, wouldn't it be neat to be able to do a cello career that's not just classical?
Right. No, I understand. Yeah, when I audition, first I'll just mention what the audition was like. There was an ad in your union paper. I was looking to sort of do something different than playing in the orchestra. My wife said, "You've done recording work. Why don't you try this?" So I contacted them, and the audition really wasn't like an orchestra audition. They invited several people to come, and you would just go there by yourself. There wasn't like there was a group of people. It was just me. And I went to a studio there in Nashville. I think it was the maybe Ocean Way studio. I can't remember exactly. Anyway, the contractor was there. The leader, who was the concert master, the contractor played violin, but he wasn't the concert master. The leader, and then the other cellist in the group. And they asked me to play for them. And first they asked me to play the movement of a concerto. They wanted to see if I had some techniques. I played Dvorak. Then they wanted to hear a movement of Bach, a couple movements of Bach. And then after that, they pulled out a big book. And it was just gig music, charts. And they said, okay, play this. I played it. And they said, okay, play this. And they just kept turning pages, turning pages, turning pages. And then I did that for a fair amount of time. And then they said, okay, we'll contact you. We're going to listen to a bunch of other people. They said, if we agree that you're a possibility, we'll invite you back for 2 sessions in Nashville. Then you'll do the recordings. And if we like that, then we'll offer you the job. So that was the background and how I got hired. I did go do the sessions, and then they asked me to come back and join the group on a permanent basis after a probationary period. As far as the work was concerned, I'm sorry, forgive Benjamin. Well, what was the crux of your question? You want me to say a little bit of what that work was like?
Yeah, I mean, both. Yeah, you've already shed some light on the studio
The
gig
process to
type
get
gig, but then you played a wide variety of styles too.
Yeah, so basically, the people we worked with, it was a mix. We did some country music albums, and in general, the artists weren't there. It would be their arrangers or their leaders. So we did some recording for Faith Hill, something she never used. We did Ricky Skaggs. We did Big and Rich, one of the Big and Rich guys. I can't remember which one was there at the session. We did a Bruce Springsteen album, the Devils and Dust. Um, I'm not a country music guy, and I don't, if a lot of no offense to anybody, Some of them could walk in the room right now and I probably wouldn't know who they are. So, but we also did some movie soundtracks. We did lots of jingles. And the way the job usually worked is I was supposed to sit by my computer. The contractor said, look, you need to check your computer every day, every couple hours. And then he would send me an email, say, Paul, I need you for such and such a day for this session at this studio. And he would tell me what kind of session it was, either a limited pressing or whatever. I would confirm. Then I would show up at the studio. We did studios all over the Nashville area and in other parts around the Nashville Metroplex. You'd show up, everything was set up. All the studios were magnificent. We would have, nice kitchens, snacks for us. They'd have video games, couches, the whole 9 yards. It's nice, beautiful setup, beautiful studios. Everything was set up when you got there, all the mics and all the headphones and whatnot. Stack of music. You go in there, and then we would start the session. And we never rehearsed the music. And it was considered, I found this out later, it was considered bad form to practice the music beforehand. So, because one day I did, and they told me they could hear me through the mics in the artist's room, and they didn't want me to do that. So it was considered bad form. We would go and we would sight read everything. And then when we finished recording a chart, the leader of the session would stand up and say, okay, there was a wrong note. The leaders had ears like nobody's business. They say somebody was out of tune at measure 5. We're going to start the bar before 5 and punch it in. So we would punch it in. And then we'd go like that. And then they would say, okay, does anybody have anything they want to punch in? And you could raise your hand and say, yeah, I did something at measure 48. Can we punch it in? And then we punch it in. When everybody was done, they say, everybody good? Great. Take a break. Then we would go get a coffee. When we go back, we would do the next chart. And we kept doing that until we were done. Then we would leave. Then they'd write me a message and say, there's a check waiting for you at the union office. And we go pick up a check. So that's what we did, just over and over again in that way.
So the Nashville String Machine never played on a stage for live. What?
It was a recording group. That's all it did. And they're still in existence, and they've been doing this for a long time. So we did play once during Tsunami Aid. This was back in whenever the big tsunami was in Indonesia, I believe. And so they did a concert there. And there were a lot of country music folks there. I just remember the Oak Ridge Boys were there. And the guy who, the gentleman who plays with the Eagles, who's married to Amy Grant, the guitarist. I can't remember his name. I'm sorry. I just don't follow these. But I met a bunch of these people. But we did play live on stage. It was with a lot of the group, and then it was supplemented. And we did this as a benefit at the Ryman Auditorium. So, but basically what we did was we just recorded. That's all we did. And the players were excellent players. I mean, those people went to schools, the best music schools, Juilliard, New England Conservatory or whatever, and they all had fantastic instruments, and they played with like soloists. They just played with this huge vibrato most of the time. I mean, they just played really this big sound. It was just this nonstop aggressive sound. That's what I remember. But, that's not for everybody. I found it stimulating working on sight reading. I'm good at sight reading. Okay. And I found that aspect stimulating. But on the other hand, I'll be frank, the quality of the music was not intellectually stimulating enough. I don't mean to sound like I'm a prima donna, but it just wasn't interesting enough to really, keep me. I can't imagine doing that indefinitely, even though the money's good. So does that answer your question, Benjamin?
Yeah, that's great. That's really great. Now, let's see. The next thing I want to ask you about, you have a number of YouTube videos where you are playing some, shall we say, not very easy modern pieces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think, it's like the extended techniques that you're going to look up what a cello can do in terms of extended techniques in a book. but it's always growing. It's always, sometimes you just like, well, how am I supposed to find these notes at the same? Oh, that's right, I can play them here.
Mm,
So I guess I'm interested in two things, kind of what draws you to those sorts of challenges. And then again, if you have, I mean, I know this is a big topic, but if you have some general advice for people who, kind of are not quite sure that they're brave enough to tackle such repertoire.
all right, that's a good question. It's a hard one to answer. I would say, yeah, I'm just trying to think how to answer, how to break this down. Well, I guess reason was drawn to that, I look, I did a lot of recording before I recorded any contemporary music. I did a whole series of Offenbach cello duets. That's also there on YouTube. So I spent a lot of time recording that. We almost finished all the books of duets. It was 7 CDs, but we never finished it. And then somebody else just recently recorded it on Brilliant Classics. So that's a good recording. So I just wanted to toss that out. I do love the regular repertoire. I mean, that's mainly what I listen to. But when I once look, once I got to a certain point, I'm an older guy, obviously, I got this white beard. Once I got to a certain point where I was financially independent enough to just do what I wanted to do, you know, that's when I started getting more interested in doing some contemporary music that I never got to do when I was younger. When I was playing an orchestra, I mean, they're not going to let me, we're not going to be playing super contemporary ornery kind of music unless you're in a major symphony. So that was something that was missing, and I was always interested in that when I was growing up. And I went to school at the New England Conservatory, and we had a number of professors there. And I remember listening to a lot of music, and also when I was growing up in New York. I mean, the orchestra would typically play contemporary music of the time. Jacob Druckmann, George Rochberg, Donald Erb. When I was at the conservatory, there was Donald Martino, who won the Pulitzer Prize, was on the faculty. There were a bunch of microtonalists on the faculty. They did a lot of Roger Sessions. I mean, these are composers that are now sort of like older composers. Okay. So that's what I sort of grew up with. And that to me, because I always heard this music in conjunction with regular concert music, I've always, in my mind, I always associated with just the continuum of the Western music, Western European culture. When I listen to Babbitt, when I would hear Babbitt growing up, I would hear Babbitt as a continuation of the Brahms, Schoenberg axis. Now we can argue about that, but that's the way I was trained to think of it. So this to me was always just part of the standard repertoire. Now, once I got older, I said, okay, now I can play this. I'm independent enough that even if people don't want to hear it or don't want to pay for these concerts, I'm doing these concerts. I don't have to get concert tickets. If I want to do it, I'm going to do it. So that's how I sort of got involved with pursuing that. I had friends also that said, Paul, you're good at that. And I never thought I was very good at it, but I had some friends that said, you need to pursue this a little bit more. I don't play a tremendous amount of newly composed music. I do a little bit of that. I have friends that will write pieces and ask me to record them, and I play at some festivals. But my main interest is in examining some of these composers of the avant-garde or the contemporary ilk that I grew up with. So I'm sorry that was a long-winded answer, Benjamin. I don't think that answered your complete question, but that's how I got into that initially. So your question was, how do I tell people that are like maybe a little afraid of this, how they're going to how to get into that?
Yeah, basically, I like for a number of my guests, there seems to be a yes and sort of spirit,
Uh,
whether it comes to even just like when opportunity knocks for different types of manifestations of music, what we do. But then there's also a degree to which you can have that attitude when you have your cello in your hands
mhm.
and not just try to think, okay, I am by design trying to play inside the box of what my box of cello playing is, but look for new ways to accomplish some of the things that at first maybe seem not even possible.
Right. Yeah, I understand. But And look, I remember Irvin Arditi of the Arditi String Quartet. I was reading an interview with him, and they play a lot of contemporary music. That's what they do. And somebody was talking to him about, is there anything that your quartet considers impossible? And he said, no, nothing is impossible. He says, if you spend enough time working on it, everything's possible. I don't know if that's necessarily true. There's some pieces that literally, I think of some things by Xenakis, some of his solo stuff that to do it his tempo, it's impossible. I get that. But that's a good point. If you put your mind to it, and if you care, you can do just about anything if you spend enough time on it. I think for people that are doing this kind of doing repertoire that's terribly difficult. So I'm going back to older composers, so you have to forgive me. But like Xenakis or Zimmerman or even Martino, I mean, people that wrote pieces that people said at one point were impossible, but now are part of the repertoire for many cellists.
Yep.
I think if you really want to do it, it can be done as long as you just take a look at the piece and you break it down. You just break it down like you break down a pop or etude. All these things can be broken down. And then if one is careful enough about it and really cares and examines the aesthetic, reads about the composers, understands why they did what they did, it's a reaction to what was going on in society and their life at the moment. It's also tied in with fashion. It's tied in with a lot of different things. I think when you're doing difficult music like that, also, when you initially start it, you have to realize it's not really possible to be perfect. I'm afraid that a lot of times we as musicians are always thinking we have to be perfect, or as perfect as possible. And we think anything less than, say, 95% perfection is a failure. And that's just humanly not possible in a lot of this repertoire. I was reading a book about performing Xenakis, and I can't remember, maybe it was Roger Woodard, I don't remember, but he was talking about the first time you play a piece by Xenakis. He says, what you should shoot for is 40% accuracy. And he says, after that, you get up to about 70%, maybe 80, but you're never going to get to 100%. So you just have to accept the fact that this is never going to be perfect. It's just not going to happen in physical, in live performance. And so that should give you, I'm not saying to be sloppy, but you give it your best and you just jump off into the deep end of the pool and just do it. You just do it. And then with the understanding that your best is good enough and that as you go along, if you want to continue to pursue this muse, it's going to improve every time through learning some more of this kind of repertoire. And I can't think of any other way to do it. I know in my case, the first time I played, a friend of mine said, you need to learn this piece by Xenakis, Kodos, a difficult unaccompanied piece. And the first time I played it, I probably got 30–40% of the notes. They were right. But I ended up playing that piece another 10 or 12 times. And by the end, I got about 80–90% of it. And that was well worth the effort because of the places it took me psychologically and spiritually and mentally. So does that answer the question? I'm sorry. I don't
Oh
know.
yeah, in a variety of ways. I mean, just even the idea of breaking things down into steps. There's times that a youngster might look at something and go, "How do I play this passage?" But like, well, first, you need to figure out how to do this, and you need to figure out,
Yeah,
and then how to string them together, and
yeah.
divide and conquer.
I sit there with the score, and whenever I get a new score, I say, I'm never going to be able to do this. And invariably, what happens, my students will see the score and they'll say, are you going to play that, Mr. Christopher? I say, no, it's impossible. They say, you need to play that on your next recital. And then I say, okay, for you, I'm going to do it. But then invariably, I look at it, and after I break it down for a while and work on it, I realize after several months that the piece isn't nearly as long. First off, when I look at it, I think this is like a half hour long. But after I work on it, I realize, no, it's actually quite compact. And the whole thing goes by much faster. Once I work through this, and I break it down like a pop or etude or something else. So, but look, I think doing contemporary music, Leslie, I'm sorry, I know you didn't ask this, but I just want to mention, I do think it's important to play contemporary music and music that's difficult because it's a reflection of the human experience. Okay, I think you would agree that a lot of the wonder of playing music is it's reflective of the human experience. And I think that taking on this difficult repertoire It's reflective of a certain period in history or reflective of a certain kind of reaction to different events. It's reflective of a different intellectual pursuit that we may not fully understand, but we should respect that. And I think when we get into that, it makes us understand more of the different dynamics of being human. I know you would agree with that. And I also think that, say, for example, if you play a lot of contemporary music, when you go back and play Beethoven or Bach, you're sort of refracting that through this understanding of the contemporary experience. Because we can't play Beethoven like Beethoven would have done it, because we've lived. We've gone through two world wars. We don't have cars, airplanes. We're different people. Everything is different. So it's never going to be like what Beethoven would have done. So the more we can absorb of that, in my humble opinion, I think the richer our performances will be. Whether or not it's a better performance or people like it is less relevant. It's just going to be more sincere. So that's my soapbox. What can I say?
I like that. I like that. And it's well said. I like that a lot.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, okay. Now, a question I ask everybody, just kind of a running theme of this series, is students who need a little extra help with motivation, whether just whatever, sometimes get just stuck in a time period in life or in a particular piece or something. Do you have some favorite suggestions, advice, go-to things that you do with students when they need some extra help getting motivated?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And when you wrote me, you included that as a possibility, and that was the one thing that I wrestled wrestled with the most. And I even talked to one of my students today. I hope you'll forgive me about that. I will say that at this point, I've been blessed because most of my students that are majors, I mean, motivation is not an issue for me. I mean, they love music so much. We have long lessons and they just like talking about music. So I'm a lucky man in that respect. You know, with all of my students, I'm not knowing if I'm going to really be able to answer this question exactly. With all of my students, when I first get my students, I always ask them, what is it that they hope to accomplish or what do they want to get done playing the cello? And so some of them say, I want to be, I mean, most of my students, they don't say they want to play in New York Philharmonic. Let's be frank, but they want to do it professionally. Or some students will say, Mr. Christopher, I'm majoring in something else. I mainly want to play for my enjoyment. I maybe want to play in a string quartet, do some weddings. But everyone's got different goals, and we're always reassessing that to make sure that that what they're doing is helping them get towards the goal. Does that make sense? And that if they find out at some point they're lacking the interest or life is getting in the way, i.e., they may have children or they may need to spend more time in something else, then we need to reevaluate that. So I'm always trying, hopefully, we're setting up realistic expectations. Now, with my students, and you're probably like this also, Benjamin, I spend a lot of time with my students. I see myself less as a teacher than as a mentor, which is something I never felt I had when I was going to school. No disrespect to my professors, but I always felt I needed somebody to want to spend time with me, to want to talk about music, to want to help me learn how to be a professional. I know that sounds ridiculous, but that's what I needed as a young person. As opposed to just telling me, Paul, you need to practice more, you need to practice your scales more. If you're out of tune, you're an idiot. I didn't really need that. I needed someone to want to talk to me about music. So with my students, I love music and I'm always listening to it. And they just swing by and there's always listening to music and they'll ask me why I'm listening to these pieces. And we just talk about music all the time. At our lessons, if they're not playing, they're asked, we're talking about just technical things and why they do what they do. And I'm not really, like I said, I'm not really answering your question. I'm just trying to think of some students I had that were not motivated that stuck with it. Because I've had students that started and then realized music is hard and it's not just groupies and everything's easy. You know what I mean? That you've
Yes.
got to focus. And those students usually ended up just, which is fine. They just ended up doing something else. But I'm not, like I said, I'm not answering your question. I don't really know what this, look, if I knew the answer to get people motivated that are going into music, if you're going into music, look, if you're going into music, if you're going to college for music, you decided that's my life and I'm going to stick with it, then you better be self-motivated. There's nobody that's going to get you motivated. Now, you guess you can do it through fear. You can tell people you're going to fail them, but I didn't go into music because I wanted to bully people. I mean, I don't want to do that. I mean, music is something you do to uplift people. It's done out of love. It's done out of wanting to commune with a greater spirit. The whole idea of me threatening people to motivate them just seems ridiculous. So I really don't know what the answer is. I mean, the only thing I would say is sometimes I'll tell a student, you look, you want to perform, you're gonna do a recital. We're gonna set up a date. It's the motivation for a lot of people is the fear of performing. I know that sounds ridiculous.
No, that's
Yeah,
true.
but almost always that helps. But unfortunately, there's been a couple it didn't work. So what are your secrets,
Oh no,
Benjamin?
I was just thinking in terms of yes, yes, self-motivating, figuring out how to be a self-motivator, but I'm thinking also about sometimes those inner demons, those voices in one's head. It can be a student who's uh, they're a perfectionist,
Yeah,
or or they've set unrealistic expectations, and so they're thinking that they're not accomplishing much in the practice room, or things like that.
complex because a lot of the kids come in, you don't know what their background is exactly. I mean, what was their family situation like? You know, uh, what are they dealing with in their personal lives? It's just difficult. The motivation, once again, if you can figure it out, you and I can figure it out, we can write a book and make a tremendous amount of money on this. But you got to want to do it. You got to love it. If you like your point of being overly perfectionist, yeah, of course, this happens too. And also the fear of performing, like, well, Mr. Christopher, I'll perform when I'm ready. I'm not ready. It's like you're never going to be ready. Just, just, just go do it. And if it's not perfect, the sun will rise. Look, I'll tell you. Okay, this is it. I have students that are afraid to perform, for example. Okay. But I say, you're going to perform. This is the date you're going to go. Okay. And then they say, well, okay, I'm going to get out there. And what if I have a memory slip? I say, okay, if you have a memory slip, you're just going to keep going. And then you'll finish. And if it didn't go as well as you want, the sun will still rise the next day. No one died. And then you're just going to pick yourself up and you're going to try better next time. It's a lesson in life. Not everything is going to be sweet and perfect. Sometimes we fail and we just get up and we realize that people forgive us or realize that we're all human and we are going to fail occasionally. I don't know if that's a good motivational thing, but that's what I tell my students because I know on my case, I have certainly failed more times than I want to admit, but it didn't kill me and I carried on. So I hope that's helpful, Benjamin.
It is, that is. Well,
Okay.
Paul, I know you're coming back to the cello, but you have projects in the works. What's coming down the pike for the rest of 2024?
Okay. Well, 2024, as I mentioned to you, I'm recovering from surgery. So I'm just starting to get back to playing my cello. So we're going to have to go to 2025. Is that acceptable?
Yes.
Okay, 2025, I'm finally going to do a recital in February. And all contemporary music. I'll play some Busati, a piece I recorded by Mark Lee in Tennessee, and then a piece by Alan Shawn, who teaches up in Vermont. And then I did finish recording this summer before my surgery, the complete unaccompanied cello music of Christian Wolff. Christian Wolff, as many of us, if people don't know, Christian Wolff is the last surviving member of the New York School from the 1970s, along with John Cage, Earl Brown, and Morton Feldman. So Christian Wolff is still kicking. He's still alive. He's 90 years old, and he's still professor emeritus at Dartmouth. And I recorded all his work and touched base with him. and sent him the recordings. None of the pieces have been commercially available in in the States. There's 4 unaccompanied pieces, and they're all ornery and very difficult. And he said he was happy with my performances and he wanted me to release them. So now that I'm recovering, we're trying to figure out we're going to self-release it because nobody buys CDs, but we'll do some streaming so libraries can get involved in this. And then finally, we're going to have an Elliott Carter festival. We always every year we try to pick a great contemporary composer, and then we do a concert with students and faculty playing their music. So a couple of years ago, we did Babbitt, we did Mauricio Kagel, we did Lucier, we did Barrio. So this coming year is Elliott Carter. In March, we'll do a concert of all Elliott Carter's music. A lot of small pieces, unaccompanied pieces. I'm doing several pieces on that concert. So that's all I've got planned because once again, I was incapacitated and a lot of what I originally had planned. I usually do 2 recitals a year, but everything got messed up because of my health. So, but God willing, I'm going to hammer through and play some great music going forward.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure glad you're doing better.
Well, I appreciate that. It's nice of you to say that, my friend. I appreciate you.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, that was, I think, very inspiring on a lot of levels. And I know everybody out there is going to have a great weekend of practicing, hopefully all next week too. And we'll meet you all back here this time next Friday. And thanks again, Paul Christopher, and best of luck to you.
Thank you. I appreciate you, Benjamin, very, very much for inviting me to do this. You're a good man to ask me.
Well, thanks so much. All right, take care, everybody.
You had me at